Welcome to our deep dive. Today we're getting into the transfer-ready methodologies here at Succession Strength. And, usually when we talk about business succession, we focus, we focus almost entirely on the mechanics, right?
Right, the valuations, the legal agreements, the tax structures.
Exactly. We treat it like this clean, logical math problem, just neatly organized on a spreadsheet.
Which is comfortable, but not really accurate.
Not at all, because then you step into the actual human reality of a transition, and suddenly that spreadsheet is completely useless. There's this really provocative premise we're dealing with today.
The emotional side of handing over the keys.
Yeah. Think about it. You, as the founder, you want your successor to run the business exactly the way you did. I mean, you sacrificed your evenings, your weekends, your family vacations.
You build those relationships over decades with blood, sweat, and tears.
Literally. So
Yeah.
logically, you just expect the exact same level of sacrifice from the person taking over.
And honestly, it makes complete psychological sense. I mean, you are looking at the formula that kept your business alive through recessions, through market shifts.
You survived by operating a certain way.
Exactly. So it feels incredibly risky, terrifying, really, to hand the keys to someone who wants to drive differently.
But here is the multi-million-dollar question that you, as a founder, probably aren't asking yourself. What if your successor doesn't want to be you?
That is the big one.
Right. So today we are diving into our internal case studies and the psychological frameworks behind Succession Strength's methodology to unpack what we call the clone assumption.
It's a huge issue in almost every transition.
We're going to explore why expecting a successor to be a carbon copy of you is basically the fastest way to destroy a transition. We'll look at why generational differences are actually crucial assets.
Rather than deficiencies, which is how they're usually seen.
Yes. And most importantly, we're going to break down how to finally shatter the silence that ruins so many of these successions.
So let's just start with the foundation here. The clone assumption is, well, it's the unspoken expectation that a successor will think, work, and value the exact same things as the founder.
Unspoken being the key word there.
Exactly. It is rarely a formal demand. A founder doesn't usually sit across a boardroom table and say, I demand you be an exact replica of my personality and work ethic.
Right, that would be absurd.
It would. Instead, it is an ambient pressure. It's just in the air.
It's communicated through, micro interactions.
Oh.
It's that sideways glance when the successor leaves the office at 5 o'clock.
Oh, the 5 o'clock stare. Yes.
Yeah, or it's the subtle, totally unnecessary correction on an email draft to a client, just to make it sound slightly more like the founder's voice.
Just tweaking the tone for no real business reason.
Exactly. And it's every single time the founder overrides a strategic decision or steps back in to take control just because a project wasn't executed their specific way.
And the result of all those micro-interactions is a disastrous behavioral loop.
Disastrous how?
Well, think about the psychology of the successor operating in that environment. They learn very quickly that their unique ideas are simply not welcome.
They're viewed as a threat, right?
Right. Their vision for modernizing the company isn't viewed as innovation. It's a threat to the established order. So over time, the successor realizes that any deviation from the founder's method just results in friction.
Or a straight-up veto.
Exactly. So what do? They adapt by shutting down.
I picture it kind of like hiring a brilliant Michelin-starred executive chef for your restaurant, but then you insist on standing right over their shoulder to season the soup yourself.
That is a perfect analogy.
Right. Like you tell them how to hold the knife, you adjust the heat under the pan. Eventually, that chef is just going to hand you the spoon, cross their arms, and say, fine, just tell me what to do.
They stop bringing new recipes.
They just wait for instructions.
And that leads to the fatal misinterpretation. The founder looks at that successor, who has handed over the spoon, so to speak, and they perceive a complete lack of initiative.
They think, oh, this person doesn't have the fire.
They're not a self-starter like I was. That's exactly what they think. The founder resents the successor for lacking drive, while the successor resents the founder for micromanaging them into complete paralysis.
Okay, but wait, let me push back on this a little bit. Is the founder entirely wrong in that assessment?
How you mean?
Well, if a successor shuts down and stops bringing ideas just because their feelings got hurt by a few overridden decisions, doesn't that objectively prove they lack the grit required to run a company?
That's a very common assumption.
Because running a business is brutal, If you surrender because of a little micromanagement, maybe you just aren't built for the CEO chair.
It sounds logical, but organizational psychology tells a completely different story. What you're describing is not a lack of grit. It's a psychological phenomenon called learned helplessness.
Learned helplessness.
Yeah. If you put a highly capable, resilient person into an environment where their actions consistently have no impact on the outcome because the founder vetoes everything, their brain optimizes for energy conservation.
Oh, wow. So they just power down.
Right. Why expend massive emotional and intellectual energy fighting a battle you were structurally guaranteed to lose?
That makes a lot of sense.
The successor's shutdown is not a lack of resilience. It is a highly rational response to an unwinnable environment.
So the founder mistakes a rational survival mechanism for weakness, which really brings us to the core mistake driving this entire dynamic, right? Confusing difference with deficiency.
That is the heart of it.
And we see this play out most aggressively in the generational clash between outgoing founders and incoming successors.
Absolutely. To understand this, we have to look at causality. Like, why do these generations operate so differently in the first place?
Because they grew up in totally different worlds.
Exactly. Traditionalists and boomers often place an incredibly high value on physical presence, strict hierarchy, and unwavering loyalty.
Being at the desk from dawn until dusk is basically a proxy for dedication.
But we have to understand why that is. They built their businesses in an era where physical presence was the only reliable way to monitor quality, collaborate, and build trust.
The desk was the absolute center of productivity. You couldn't just slack someone.
Exactly. Whereas Gen X and millennial successors grew up in a completely different paradigm. They entered a workforce defined by the internet, mobile technology, and eventually the normalization of asynchronous work.
Which means they completely decouple work from a physical location.
Right. To them, efficiency and results matter significantly more than seat time. And frankly, this mindset shift actually increases a company's operational resilience.
Wait, how so?
Well, a business reliant on a single physical location and local talent is vulnerable.
Yeah.
A successor who wants to move operations to the cloud, implement flexible hours, and hire asynchronous talent, they're actually building a business that can survive localized disruptions.
And serve clients across multiple time zones.
Yeah.
So we have to completely reframe the narrative here. A successor who demands work-life balance is not lazy. They're just operating on a different system of efficiency.
Yes, exactly.
A successor who wants to automate the supply chain instead of calling vendors on the phone every morning isn't being disloyal to the founder's legacy. They're just trying to keep the business relevant.
Different does not equal deficient. Yet, because the founder's identity is so deeply tied up in their specific methodology, they see deficiency everywhere.
I have to challenge the emotional reality of this, though, because understanding this intellectually is one thing, but actually feeling it is another.
Sure.
If I'm a founder and I literally bled for this company, I missed my kids' soccer games, I stayed up nights sweating over payroll.
It's deeply personal.
It's incredibly personal. So when my successor packs up their bag and leaves at 5 o'clock sharp, it feels like a slap in the face.
Yeah.
How do we get founders to stop taking those generational differences as a personal insult to their past sacrifices?
It is the single hardest psychological hurdle in a transition, hands down. The founder has to separate their past personal sacrifice from the business's current operational requirements.
That sounds really hard to do.
It is. But you sacrifice because the business demanded it then. Your suffering was a necessity of that specific era and your specific starting point.
Okay.
But expecting the successor to replicate your pain is not a business strategy.
Wow.
It's a demand for emotional validation. You want them to suffer so you feel seen.
That is heavy, but it's so true.
Once a founder recognizes that the successor's 5 o'clock departure is a reflection of modern efficiency, not an insult to the founder's history, the resentment actually begins to dissolve.
That is a massive paradigm shift.
Okay.
And if we build on this idea that differences are not deficiencies, we arrive at this really fascinating realization.
Which is?
These differences are actually exactly what the business needs to survive. Like,
Yep.
The successor shouldn't be a clone. That's the entire point of a transition.
Let's break down what the successor actually brings to the table, though, starting with different skills.
Okay, let's do it.
The founder built the business through grit, instinct, and handshake relationships. That was the currency of their era. You knew every supplier by their first name. Deals were done on trust.
But a modern successor might bring systems thinking, digital fluency, structured strategic planning.
Yes. They want to implement a CRM so the company knows every supplier, not just the founder.
Right, because if the founder gets hit by a bus, the handshake relationships disappear.
Exactly. But if the founder only values their own instinct-driven skills, they will completely blind themselves to the immense value of the successor's structured skills.
You know, the analogy that comes to mind here is navigation.
Oh, I like this. Go on.
The founder's skill set is like knowing how to navigate a ship perfectly by the stars.
Yeah.
It's brilliant, it is deeply impressive, and honestly, it got them across the ocean.
True.
But the successor is coming in trying to install a GPS, and the founder is yelling, "Why are you looking at that screen? Look at the sky. You're being lazy."
That's hilarious and so accurate.
But the terrain is completely changed. They aren't on the open ocean anymore. They are navigating this complex, high-speed, multi-lane highway system. Navigating by the stars is going to cause a massive crash.
The environment dictates the necessary tool. And that leads to the second major difference we have to talk about: vision.
This is where the emotional divide really widens, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
The founder views the business as their legacy. Their instinct is preservation. They want to put a glass case around the company to protect it from risk.
Because to them, the business is a finished masterpiece.
Right. But the successor views the business as their future. They do not want to manage a museum.
Nobody wants to manage a museum.
They want to use the existing business as a foundation to build something of their own. And neither perspective is inherently wrong.
But without acknowledging that fundamental difference in vision, the founder feels their legacy is being erased, and the successor feels their future is being stifled.
Exactly. Which brings us to the third reality check: the different era.
The market has changed. Consumer expectations have shifted. The speed of supply chains is just unrecognizable compared to 20 years ago.
The world the founder built the business in literally no longer exists.
It's gone.
This means the founders heavily relied upon instincts might actually be a liability today.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is. Your gut feeling about marketing might be anchored in an era before digital acquisition costs dominated the landscape. Meanwhile, the successor's instincts about what works right now might be exactly calibrated to the current reality.
Okay, so we have all these differences: skills, vision, eras, and we just established that these differences are absolutely necessary for survival.
Right.
Why then do they cause so many transitions to fail?
The answer comes down to one really destructive element: silence.
Silence, just people not talking.
Families and partnerships stall out because they simply do not talk about what they need. It becomes this stalemate of mutual assumptions.
The founder assumes the successor will just figure it out independently because the founder had to figure it out alone back in the day.
And the successor assumes the founder is too stubborn to ever understand modern methods, so they just stop trying to explain.
So the transition fails, not because of a lack of capability, but because of a catastrophic lack of communication.
Exactly. If you are listening to this right now, there are 5 hard questions that are desperately being avoided in your transition.
Oh, I know these. Number 1, what do you need for me to succeed?
Number 2, what do I need from you to let go?
Number 3, where do we see the business differently and how do we handle that?
Number 4, what am I doing that makes you feel controlled?
And number 5, what are you doing that makes me feel pushed out?
Those questions pierce right through the clone assumption.
They do, but let's be honest about human nature here. You cannot just casually drop, "Hey, Dad, what am I doing that makes you feel pushed out?" while passing the potatoes at a sunny family dinner.
No, absolutely not.
It is a social minefield. You would ruin the weekend. Families avoid these conversations because there's just no natural, safe entry point.
And trying harder to force the conversation without a framework usually backfires.
It just turns into a yelling match.
Right.
Yeah.
You cannot solve a structural communication problem with sheer willpower. It requires a structured conversation out loud and, crucially, without blame.
Which brings us to the client journey we use to actually break this silence. Moving from the conversation cards to deep diagnostics, how do we actually create that framework for safety?
You need structure and permission. That is where the succession strength conversation cards serve as the entry point, and we really need to look at the psychological mechanism of why they work.
Okay, let me stop you there because I really have to push back on this.
Go for it.
We are talking about decades of ingrained family dynamics, deep resentments, massive egos, millions of dollars on the line.
Sure.
How can a simple deck of prompt cards dismantle all of that? It sounds a bit like, putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound.
I get that. It sounds too simple until you understand the clinical psychology behind it.
Okay, explain.
It's about triangulation and externalizing the conflict. In a normal argument between a founder and a successor, the energy is directed back and forth. It is you against me, your ego against my ego.
Right.
When a person feels attacked, their amygdala triggers a threat response, and logical conversation just shuts down.
Defensiveness completely takes over.
Yes. The genius of the cards is that they introduce an objective third party into the dynamic. The card is the one raising the uncomfortable topic.
It's not the founder pointing a finger.
And it is not the successor launching an accusation. The card is just sitting on the table asking, where do we disagree?
You both look at the prompt.
Exactly. The conflict is externalized from your relationship onto the paper. It makes it safe to ask hard questions without triggering that immediate defensive reflex.
It's kind of like blaming the rules of a board game instead of fighting with the other player. Like, hey, I didn't bring this up to attack you. The card just says we have to answer this question.
That diffusion of tension is exactly what allows honesty to finally surface. And we see this apply across the board.
Not just in family businesses.
No, in family businesses, the clone assumption is highly emotional and tied to personal identity, sure. But we also see this in professional services, law firms, accounting practices.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. In those settings, the clone assumption is based on methodology. The senior partner expects the junior partner to manage client relationships exactly the same way they do.
So the emotional texture is a bit different, but the solution is identical.
Exactly. You start with the structured conversation via the cards, which lowers defenses and opens the door for the deeper diagnostic work that actually prepares a business for a handover.
But what happens, though, when you flip a card and it reveals a massive chasm?
What kind of chasm?
Let's say the card prompts a discussion on vision, and the successor admits they want to take the business in a radically different direction. They want to kill the founder's absolute favorite product line.
Yeah.
How is that not an immediate table-flipping crisis?
Because the structured framework transforms a crisis into a negotiation. The founder's role in that moment is not to agree or disagree. It is simply to understand the successor's vision.
And the successor's role is to understand the founder's core values.
Yes. A pivot might sound terrifying at first, but somewhere between the founder's foundational values and the successor's modern vision is a viable path forward.
But you have to find it together.
Right. The cards expose the gap, and the subsequent diagnostic work builds the bridge. You can never build a bridge if you refuse to acknowledge the canyon.
You cannot navigate a path in the dark. You have to turn the lights on, even if you don't like what the room looks like at first.
And that is the ultimate value of dismantling the clone assumption. It forces you to turn the lights on.
This entirely changes the definition of a successful transition. It moves it from a process of replication to a process of evolution.
It does. And I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder today, something that steps outside of everything we have discussed.
Okay, let's hear it.
We spend so much time analyzing successors to see if they are ready to lead. But ponder this. If your successor completely fails after you step down, is it truly because they couldn't learn your business?
Whoa.
Or is it because you built your business in a way that structurally could not survive without your specific personality?
Wow, that is a haunting question. A business reliant on a single personality isn't a legacy, it's a trap.
Exactly.
Adapting a company to survive beyond your ego takes immense humility.
Yeah.
But it is the absolute only way to save the value you worked so hard to build. If you look in the mirror and only want to see yourself reflected back, you aren't looking for a successor. You are looking for a clone. And the clone assumption will destroy everything you have built.
It really will.
Well, if you were ready to stop avoiding the hard conversations and start preparing your business for the future, visit successionstrength.com or email us at info@successionstrength.com to discuss your specific situation. And please, make sure to follow the Transfer Ready by Succession Strength podcast for more conversations on exactly what it takes to prepare your business for succession or sale.